right, so multiple sources tell us here at CTV News that, of course, subject to change, because as I said, things aren't totally baked, that the government is looking at public service cuts through both attrition and workforce adjustments, including possible early retirement incentives. Here to break down all that messaging and the stakes of a potential Christmas election is our front bench. Sharon Carr is a CTV News political analyst. She's former Deputy Chief of Staff to former Finance Minister Bill Morneau. Laura D'Angelo here in studio with me is with Enterprise Canada and previously worked in Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's office. Jamie Ellerton is the principal at Canaptus and worked for Minister Jason Kenney during the Harper government. Sebastian Scampsey rounds us out tonight. He's former Director of Media Relations to Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Very nice to see you. Sharon, I'll start with you. Why was like every fifth word from the government today in question period, you want a Christmas election? What is the strategy being employed at this moment in time, less than a week out from the budget?
I feel like we're going to have to ask Santa what that is. But honestly, I think it's kind of going back to what we heard coming from Minister McKinnon as well earlier. I think what they're trying to do is leaving the buck in the opposition's hands and getting people to potentially force them, or like, nobody wants an election at Christmas. Let's be real. No one wants an election anytime soon. But they're trying to set some narrative up so that should there be any disagreements or different views in the budget, that they've said, hey, we've put a budget out there. Now it's up to you whether or not you want to take people to the polls. And let's be real, I don't think anybody wants to go to the polls. The Liberals maybe a little bit because of how they're polling, and I think the way things with Pierre Poilievre have been going. But this is purely a strategy to shift the narrative so that it is left with the Conservatives to decide whether or not they're going to support the budget or not.
Sebastian, what kind of prepositioning do you think this is?
Well, I mean, Pierre Poilievre has, in fact, laid out some weeks ago the three principles he requires in a budget to offer up even a consideration of support. I know Minister McKinnon doesn't require a lesson in parliamentary procedure from us necessarily, but I think it is important to remind the government, of course, that they are the ones who need to adjust the budget accordingly so that opposition parties can see a point in supporting them. Of course, they no longer have the loyal NDP coalition partners to get them across the line. But Conservatives can't be expected, as the chief opposition party, to back a document and disastrous Liberal policies that are going to further hurt Canadians.
So, Jamie, let's unpack that for a second, because I think the key question is, who is going to offer support among opposition parties to get this budget across the finish line should the decision be not to go to an election? I think there's no formal agreement with the NDP, but as Sebastian kind of lays out, the Conservatives have staked very specific demands. So have the Bloc. Some of which, I'll pick one: the OAS increase from the Bloc. The deficit number from the Conservatives seem like they would be impossible to meet. So remove them from the equation for a moment. Is it up to the NDP? And what do you think the chances are that they're going to be the ones to say, let's go to an election?
Well, Vashti, if I have to be the first to put my marker down in the front bench betting pool as to how this is all going to unfold, I think all the opposition parties are going to scream what they're going to scream and say it's all terrible and it's awful and they can't do it, and here's all the reasons why we're right and righteous. But when it comes time for an actual vote, I think there's going to be a few conspicuous absences that'll allow them to say they voted against it, but the thing still goes through. I just actually don't see it working out for anyone and kind of forcing Canadians to go to the polls right now. And I also think the government's kind of playing a high-stakes chicken, but I don't think they have the biggest risk if they are thrust back into an election period. And so I think they're going to see this saber rattling as we tend to. I think silly season, it's normal in the run-up to Christmas, started early this year, probably because the budget is so late and coming here in the first week of November. But ultimately, I think this is just political games being played all around right now.
Yeah, I said this to you earlier on radio, Laura, but I feel like of all the parties, the Liberals would mind the least. If they, not to say everyone wants or anything, but they would mind the least if there happened to be an election in a month or so.
I think that's right. I think they would mind the least. But as I said earlier on radio, I don't think they want an election. I don't think anyone wants an election. When you ask yourself who benefits from an election, the answer certainly is not Canadians, not the country, not the economy. So I don't think they're angling for it. It is very much an expectations management game. Minister McKinnon is very clearly setting the stage to Sharon's point, to make sure that should things not go great here, it is very clear that a vote against the budget is a vote for an election. They want to make sure that that narrative is very hard-lined and that Canadians are not getting mixed messages about that.
Speaking of narratives, I did, Sharon, want to get your take on what has been interesting to me to see as far as an evolution in the narrative the government is trying to land, in particular around cuts. Because there was a time, at the beginning of September when it was the word austerity was employed in French by the Prime Minister. And then you saw like 6 weeks where they weren't talking about cuts or austerity at all. I was told behind the scenes they don't want that to be the narrative. And then since that speech last week the Prime Minister delivered at the U of O, and then the comments today from Minister Champagne, like they're talking all of a sudden quite a bit more about it. What do you think is going on there?
It's setting the expectations. Listen, Liberal governments almost never want to talk about cuts because it implies a whole bunch to it that they don't want. You've got public sector unions that are very vocal, have always been vocal, but to be very clear, and this is probably an unpopular opinion coming from a centrist individual, is we have to cut the public service. We're talking about building in this country, and we talk about build, baby, build. We got to cut, baby, cut as well, because the federal government is grown to a size that makes no sense. And listen, having spent many, many years working for all three levels of government, and most recently the federal government, I can say there are some really valuable, thoughtful leaders who work in the public sector who bring expertise, but there's a lot of bloat. There's a lot of people who do not need to be in those roles. And to be honest, the federal public service should not just be a place of employment, it should be a place of service. And if the service standards are not getting where they need to be, and we've seen that with reporting around CRA and others, attrition sure is one thing, early retirement, but I personally would like to see it go a bit deeper than that. I think there's a way to bring the entire public service to a more efficient operating machine, and I think that's what they're trying to do. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that public sentiment, the general public doesn't love the idea that the public service is a place where people can just treat it as a place of employment where they go and knock at that same service standard. It should not be one of the largest employers in the country, and I think that they're setting the expectations for that.
Do you think they are doing that, Sebastian? And I ask because if, for example, the last conversation we had about the probability or possibility of the NDP supporting them is a factor in passing the budget, I do think they certainly can't talk the way Sharon just did if they want to secure that support. What do you think?
Well, I think this is the beauty of being a Mark Carney liberal. It is saying one thing, doing another, and saying another thing altogether entirely. This is, I mean, you said the word evolution. I think this is a giant flip-flop, and it is a incredible middle finger to a lot of the NDP left socialist government workers, and there's commas between those categories, by the way, that put their trust behind the Prime Minister and are now getting some whiplash. So I think we'll see how this turns out. I don't suspect that the voters in Ottawa and Nepean will be particularly happy with the Prime Minister's position on this.